The sheriff's voice hit the diner like a fist on a tabletop. "I'm not going to say it again, old man. Get up. Get out." It was the summer of 1965, and the morning light was coming through the plate glass windows of a Route 66 roadside diner, somewhere between Kingman and Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place with chrome stools, hand-lettered menu boards, and coffee that had been burning on the burner since 5 in the morning. The kind of place where working men ate without looking up from their plates, where truckers traded weather reports in 2-word sentences, and where nobody with any sense made trouble before 8 o'clock. But Sheriff Carl Pruitt had never much cared about sense. He stood over the corner booth with his thumbs hooked in his belt, 6 feet of pressed khaki and county authority, staring down at a man old enough to be his father. The old man wore a faded canvas jacket and a VFW cap with a single pin on the front. He sat very still. His hands were flat on the table on either side of a coffee cup he hadn't touched. He didn't look up at the sheriff. He didn't speak. He just sat there, the way men sit when they have learned, at great cost, in places most people will never see, how to absorb something without breaking. The whole diner had gone quiet. A waitress stood frozen behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand, not pouring, not moving. 2 truckers in the far booth had stopped chewing. A family near the window, a mother, a father, 2 small kids, had gone completely still, the father's hand resting on his younger child's arm, as though steadying him for something. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For a moment, no one in that diner breathed. And then, from the corner booth nearest the window, the one with the worn leather seat and the clear view of the whole room, a chair scraped back across the linoleum floor. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of a man who had made a decision and wasn't in any hurry about it. John Wayne stood up. But that moment didn't start there. Route 66 in the summer of 1965 was still the spine of America, but just barely. The interstate system was eating it alive, mile by mile, bypass by bypass, and the towns that had built themselves around the old highway were starting to feel it. Diners that had served 300 people a day in 1955 were down to 60. Motels with neon signs and swimming pools sat half empty on Tuesday nights. The America that Route 66 had carried, the road trip America, the post-war America, the America that believed a long drive and a good meal could fix most things, was quietly folding itself up and putting itself away. The diner outside Kingman was one of the ones still holding on. Red vinyl booths, a counter with 9 stools, a pie case with 4 rotating options, and an owner named Walt Gibbs, who had been opening the doors at 5:30 every morning since 1951. Walt didn't advertise. Couldn't need to. The regulars came because they always had, and the travellers came because it was the only place with lights on for 40 miles in either direction. Earl Dawson had been a regular for 9 years. He was 71 years old, Korean War, 1st Marine Division, Chosin Reservoir. The November of 1950, when the temperature dropped to 30 below, and 17,000 Marines were surrounded by 120,000 Chinese troops and had to fight their way out over 17 days through ice and snow and darkness. Earl never talked about it. Not once. Not to his neighbours, not to his family, not to anyone who asked. He had a Purple Heart in a shoebox under his bed that he hadn't opened in 15 years. He lived alone in a trailer 4 miles east on the highway, drove a 1958 pickup truck with a cracked windshield he kept meaning to fix, and every Thursday morning, without fail, he came to Walt's diner, took the same corner booth, and ordered the same thing. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy. Wheat toast, no butter. 9 years. Same booth. Same order. Same quiet Thursday morning that was his alone. Until the morning Sheriff Carl Pruitt decided it wasn't anymore. Pruitt had been sheriff of the county for 12 years, and in 12 years he had developed a precise understanding of one thing above all others: how to make a room feel his authority without ever quite crossing a line that could be written down. He wasn't a violent man. He didn't need to be. He had subtler tools. A long pause before answering a question. A look held 2 seconds past comfort. A hand rested on the counter, just close enough to your coffee cup that moving it felt like a statement. He had learned early that power didn't announce itself. It just arranged the space around it until other people started making smaller and smaller decisions about where to stand and how to speak and whether to meet your eyes. That Thursday morning, he was at the counter when Earl Dawson came through the door. He watched Earl cross the diner, watched him take the corner booth, watched the young waitress, a girl named Darlene who had been working the morning shift for 3 weeks and still startled when the coffee machine kicked on, bring Earl his cup without being asked, because she already knew the order. Pruitt watched all of it with the flat, patient attention of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. There had been talk. New money was moving through the county. A motel chain out of Phoenix looking to buy land along the highway corridor and build something modern, something that would attract a different kind of traveller. The owner of the diner, Walt Gibbs, had been approached twice. Twice he had said no, but the pressure had a way of finding other channels. And Pruitt had heard the right conversations in the right places, and he had decided, in the quiet, self-serving way that small men decide things, that this was a moment to be useful to the people who might one day be useful to him. He picked up his coffee, walked across the diner, and stopped at Earl's booth. The old man looked up. Pruitt smiled the smile he used when he wanted something to look polite from a distance. "Afraid this booth's been reserved, old-timer. You're going to need to find somewhere else." Earl said nothing. He looked at his coffee cup, and the room began to go quiet around them. John Wayne had been sitting in the window booth since 6 in the morning. He was 48 days into a picture shooting 40 miles north, a western with a director who couldn't make up his mind, and a production schedule that had already slipped 3 weeks. He had driven down before sunrise because he needed an hour that belonged to nobody. No crew, no script pages, no studio phone calls. Just a counter, a cup of coffee, and the flat Arizona desert going gold outside the window. He had been watching the morning come in and thinking about nothing in particular when Earl Dawson walked through the door. He noticed the old man the way he noticed most things, quietly, without making a production of it. The VFW cap. The careful way he lowered himself into the booth. The ease of a man who had been coming to the same place long enough that his body knew the room. Wayne had gone back to his coffee. Then Pruitt crossed the diner. Wayne watched the whole thing. Watched Pruitt deliver the line about the reservation with that particular brand of official courtesy that isn't courtesy at all. Watched Earl look at the empty tables around him, 4 of them, clearly open, clearly available, and understand exactly what was happening. Watched the old man's jaw tighten and release. Watched him place both hands flat on the table and begin, slowly and without a word, to push himself up. That was the moment. Not the sheriff's voice. Not the silence in the room. The moment was Earl Dawson standing up without argument, without appeal, folding himself out of a booth in a diner he had eaten breakfast in every Thursday for 9 years, because a man with a badge had decided this morning that the rules were different. Wayne set his coffee cup down, pushed his chair back, stood up. He walked across the diner the way he walked across every set he had ever worked on, like the ground belonged to him, and he wasn't in any particular hurry to prove it. He reached Earl's booth. He looked at Pruitt once. Then he pulled out the chair across from Earl and sat down in it like he had been planning to all along. He looked up at the sheriff. "My friend was sitting here. Sit down, son, or walk away. Either one works for me." For a moment, no one moved. Pruitt stood there for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds is not a long time in most situations. In a diner full of people who had stopped breathing, with John Wayne looking up at you from a corner booth, it is an eternity. Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at Wayne, then at Earl, then back at Wayne, and something moved across his face. Not shame, not quite, but the thing that lives just underneath shame in men who haven't yet learned what it is. He turned and walked back to the counter. Sat down, picked up his coffee with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. Did not look up again. Wayne turned to Earl. The old man was still standing, halfway out of the booth, one hand gripping the edge of the table. His jaw was set hard. His eyes were dry, but only just, the way a man's eyes are dry when he has had decades of practice at keeping them that way. He was looking at Wayne the way people look at something they cannot immediately explain, uncertain whether to trust it, uncertain whether it was real. "Sit down," Wayne said. "Quiet. Not a performance. Just 2 words from one man to another." Earl sat down. Wayne signalled Darlene. She came over with her order pad and her coffee pot and her hands that had stopped shaking in the last 30 seconds. Wayne ordered 2 breakfasts without looking at the menu. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. Earl's order, which he had heard Darlene call back to the kitchen when the old man first came in. Earl noticed that. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. They sat across from each other in the corner booth while the diner slowly came back to life around them. Forks moving, conversations resuming, the coffee machine kicking on in the back. Normal sounds. The sounds of a room deciding that whatever had just happened was over and that it was safe to be ordinary again. Wayne looked at the VFW cap on the table between them. "Where did you serve?" Earl wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Korea. Chosin Reservoir. November of 50. Wayne went still for a moment. He knew what that meant. Every American who had been paying attention in 1950 knew what that meant. He picked up his cup. "Then you've already earned every meal you'll eat for the rest of your life." If you've ever known someone who carried something like that quietly, without asking for anything in return, drop a comment below. This one's for them. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is a good time to be. Word moved the way word always moved along Route 66, not through newspapers, not through official channels, but through people. Through Darlene telling her sister that evening over the phone, voice still carrying the particular electricity of someone who had witnessed something they knew they would be describing for the rest of their life. Through the 2 truckers in the far booth who stopped at the next diner 40 miles west and told the story over pie and coffee to 4 strangers who told it to 4 more. Through the family near the window, the father explaining it to his kids that night at the dinner table in a way he hoped they would remember when they were old enough to understand what it meant. By the end of the week, the story had travelled 100 miles in both directions, up and down the highway, without a single word appearing in print. Walt Gibbs, the owner, didn't say much about what he had seen that morning. He was not a man who talked easily about things that mattered to him. But 3 days after that Thursday, the small hand-printed sign that had appeared in the diner window the previous week, the one about reservations and seating policies that nobody had ever noticed or enforced before that morning, was gone. Walt took it down himself before opening. He didn't explain it to anyone. He didn't need to. Pruitt came back to the diner once, about 2 weeks later. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee. He did not look at Earl's booth. He left $1 tip, which was more than he usually left, and drove away. And after that, he found other places to have his morning coffee, and other rooms in which to arrange the space around his authority. Earl Dawson came back the following Thursday. Same booth. Same order. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. Darlene had it ready before he finished sitting down. Nobody said anything about the week before. Nobody treated it as remarkable. The regulars nodded at him the way they always had, and the truckers moved through, and the coffee burned on the burner, and the morning light came through the plate glass windows the way it always did. Some things, once said, don't need to be said again. The room already knew. John Wayne never mentioned that morning to anyone on the crew. Not to the director. Not to his co-stars. Not to the unit publicist who had heard a version of the story third hand 3 weeks later and tried to ask about it on set. Wayne looked at him for a moment, then went back to reading his script pages. It wasn't a story, he said. 2 men had breakfast. That was all he ever said about it. Here is what people get wrong about John Wayne. They remember the legend, the monument, the politics, the voice, the walk, the 30-year mythology that had built up around him like sediment around a stone. They argue about what he believed and what he said and what he represented. And in all of that noise, they miss the quieter thing. The thing that the people who actually worked beside him, who watched him when the cameras were off and the publicists were gone, came back to again and again when they tried to describe who he really was. He noticed people. The ones that most rooms had decided not to see. The waitress with the shaking hands. The extra standing in the rain. The old man in the corner booth with a purple heart in a shoebox and 9 years of Thursday mornings that nobody had ever thought to take away from him before. Wayne didn't make speeches about it. He didn't need an audience for it. He just sat down. Sometimes that is the whole thing. Sometimes sitting down across from someone that the room has decided doesn't belong is the most powerful statement a man can make. He sat down. He ordered breakfast. He poured the coffee. And in a diner on Route 66 that doesn't exist anymore, that was enough to change everything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that quiet dignity still matters, that the measure of a man is found in the moments nobody photographs, then subscribe. Because there are more stories like this one. And every single one of them deserves to be told.